Okay, can you all hear me? Yeah, I think I'm live. Oh, there we go. Cool. In 1998, I was working at a small startup called Portera. You wouldn't have heard of it. It's a failed startup now. But at the time, I was working there, and it seemed like an interesting place to be. And I was working for a gentleman named Rob Gordon. And Rob was my manager. He'd previously been a manager at a previous place. He and I were friends. And one day, he's like, hey, let's go for a walk. I'm going to be leaving Portera. I'm going to go to this place called Netflix. And they do this cool thing. It's you go to a website, you put a DVD into your cart, you go and say, I want to get this shipped to me, and then you wait several days for it to show up. And I'm like, doesn't sound like a great business model, but okay, that's interesting. I actually sat with it, and the next day I sat with that even stronger reaction. What an incredibly stupid idea. Who would do that? Who would go and add a movie to their cart, wait several days to receive it when they can just get in their car, drive over to Blockbuster, and go pick up a movie? So it didn't seem like a very good idea to me. But fast forward a year later, Portera still wasn't doing that well. I wasn't that excited about it. I decided to move on, and Rob calls me up, and he's like, hey, Josh, you want to come interview at Netflix? I said, okay, what have I got to lose? It was the boom of the market at the time. I figured if this doesn't work out, I'll just go find something else. So why not? I'll go in and talk to them. So that day I went in for interviews in August, and I met with this rather dapper gentleman. This is Dr. Neil Hunt. He was the chief product officer at Netflix for many years. And he just said a few things to me while we were sitting there that really changed the way that I thought about Netflix and the opportunity. He said, we're going to do this thing. It's called a home rental library. You never hear them talk about this today at Netflix, but that's how we thought about it at the time. People are going to have these DVDs at home. They'll be able to watch whatever they want. When they're done, they can send it back. They'll have this list. We're going to call it a queue. Very British thing. You can tell Neil was involved in that. But people will have their list. They can have their movie shipped. It's going to be great. And it's going to be a subscription service, not a la carte. So we think this will really help us get a lot of traction. And in just a few sentences, Neil had conveyed a lot of information to me. He had given me an experience that I could imagine and I could relate to. And he told me about a business model that could potentially be successful. So I actually decided to join Netflix at that point. And not only that, but I stayed there for 17 years. So I joined this incredibly stupid company and loved it for a very long time. So just to introduce myself, here I'm Josh Evans. I was at Netflix from 1999 to 2016. I did e-commerce for a while, first for DVD as an engineer, moved into management, helped foster sort of the e-commerce part of the business, moving into streaming. And I worked right into the heart of Netflix's streaming service, working on playback services, DRM, device activation, security, all of those kinds of things. And then my last stint there was in operations engineering, where I got to learn about performance and reliability and how to drive engineering velocity. But when I think about my career at Netflix, I don't really think about it in these terms. I think about it as if I was going to school for the last 17 years. I know some people who've actually done that. I learned about modern architecture and how to build distributed systems in the cloud, operational excellence, how to move quickly with confidence. I learned about leadership from some of the strongest leaders in the industry. I learned about how to organize for success and how you use culture to align incentives to get people to do the right things and move things in the right direction. And today I'm here to talk to you about vision and strategy. These are the things that I'm very passionate about, and this is a new topic for me, so I'll be looking forward to your feedback on this. I also want to inspire all of you, if you're new managers, to think of leadership as a journey. I didn't learn all of this at once. I learned this over 17 years through experience and by learning from people that I knew and trusted. So why is Netflix relevant to this story of vision and strategy? And I would make an argument that Netflix is more relevant than most businesses because lightning struck twice in the same place. First with the DVD business, where Netflix launched this DVD by mail business that was quite successful. The incumbent Blockbuster was a $6 billion business. When Netflix first started out, they were going after this incumbent that seemed insurmountable. And yet they still managed to put Blockbuster out of business. And then Netflix did it again with streaming, built a highly successful and even more successful business than the DVD business. Today, Netflix is a global leader in subscription internet TV with a growing slate of global original content. Right now, they're at 109 million members and going strong. By the end of the quarter, they expect to be at 115 million. They're in 190 countries in tens of languages on almost any device you can imagine streaming on. If you look at the stock over the last 5 years, the proof is in the pudding. 2,000% increase since 2012. And the really interesting thing here is that this didn't happen by accident. This happened from leadership, this happened from vision, and this came out of good strategy, something that is repeatable at Netflix. So for today's journey, I'm first going to do a little bit of a deep dive into vision and talk about why vision matters. And then we'll go into strategy, a concept that I struggled with, quite honestly, for years, especially as a new manager. So we'll talk about what is strategy and how do you formulate strategies? What does that look like? And then we'll go deep into this story. We'll talk about Netflix versus Blockbuster. How did Netflix actually accomplish what they accomplished? How did they take on an incumbent and take their market away from them? And then we'll talk about Netflix streaming, another great use case where we can apply strategy. We'll talk about how Netflix got to where they are today. And then finally, I'm going to talk about my new job at GitHub, where I see some very similar sort of early inflection points that are possible, that are very similar to the experience that I had early on when I joined Netflix. So let's talk about vision. Which brave soul would like to raise their hand and tell me, why does vision matter? What does it do for you? It's a roadmap, okay. Any other thoughts? Only one brave? Justin. Provides clarity and focus, good. When I've been asked this question before, I've asked my teams to say, hey, let's go look 2 years out. What are we going to go build? And I've gotten a response of, how can we do that? We can't even really figure out what we're doing in the next 3 to 4 months. It keeps changing. Maybe I could look out 6 months, but 2 years, that just seems crazy. Why would we do that? And so the best analogy I've come up with is hill climbing. Who here is familiar with the hill climbing algorithm? Okay, we've got a few, good. I don't feel bad about explaining it then, which I plan to do anyway. So hill climbing, you start at some arbitrary point on a grid, and your goal is to get to the high point. And this is some code that I lifted out of Wikipedia. It's a very simple algorithm. This is sort of pseudocode. Don't worry about the elegance of it. But essentially, all you're doing is saying, lock into my current node, look at the adjacent nodes, pick the one that's highest. Make that your next node, lock in, do the same thing until you get to the very highest point, and then you just exit out, and now you're at the top of the hill. But imagine you don't just have a hill. Imagine you're close to the hill, but what you should be climbing is a mountain that's not nearby. And so if you run this algorithm, you're very likely to end up at what's called the local maximum, the one that is closest to you. But it's not what you should be shooting for. You should be climbing a mountain, not the nearest hill. And so for new managers, I like this analogy. I think it really resonates for me. I hope it does for you, which is that managers climb hills. And we need great hill climbers. It's more algorithmic work. It's about execution. It's about getting the next task done. It's about project management. And those are all incredibly important things. So I don't want to downplay the importance of management. But managers are essentially hill climbers. But leaders take mountains. They choose the path they want to go in. They select the mountain. They don't just go with the thing that's right next to them. They paint a picture of what it looks like to be in a certain place. And they get their team together, and they get their equipment together, and they figure out what they're going to need, and they accept the fact that they might start out in a certain path, but they might need to course correct as they go. And so managers climb hills, but leaders take mountains. And vision is the mountain. Vision is the picture you paint that helps people understand where you're going. It, as Justin said, it brings clarity to the situation. It helps people all go along the same journey together and knowing what the end point's going to look like. And so that's why vision is very important. And now I'd like to move on to strategy. We're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about strategy because I think it's sort of the deeper topic, but I think it's important that we keep that in mind. So when I was a new manager, I'd been manager for several years, my peers were getting promoted. They were becoming directors. And even while I was still a manager, one of my peers even became a VP, and I thought, what do they have that I don't have? What am I not doing right here? So I asked around a little bit, and I got this sort of vague response. Well, Josh, you know, you're not strategic enough. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I had no clue. I really had no clue. I was just stumped. Luckily, I had a great mentor and friend, Patty McCord, And I went to Patty, and she's standing in her cube, and I'm talking to her, I'm saying, I'm just lost. People are telling me I'm not strategic enough. I don't know where to get started. How do I develop these skills? I don't even know what this means. I couldn't see what I couldn't see. And we're standing there, and she's in her cube, and she's got this stack of books, just this classic Patty, had a stack of books of Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And she just reaches over from the pile, hands it to me, and says, just read the chapter on being proactive. I said, okay, I'll take a look at that. So, of course, being the overachiever I am, I read the book within the next couple of days, went through, and there was some really useful stuff in there. So I want to share this with you because these are the baby steps. These are the first steps towards thinking in a bigger way and moving beyond that sort of hill climbing, algorithmic mentality and starting to really grow as a leader. So Covey talks about these concepts, your circle of influence and your circle of concern. Your circle of influence are those things that you directly affect. Your circle of concern are those things that you're still responsible for dealing with. And if you're a new manager, it frequently feels like this, and it feels like there's all this pressure coming at you that are just squeezing you like a tin can, just crushing you. It feels like everything's happening to you, and you don't have any control over the situation. This is very common, I think, for new managers. But the goal is to meet those challenges head on. This is what it means to be proactive, to start pushing your sphere of influence out. So instead of those things happening to you, you are reaching out, you're getting ahead of these things, and you're taking those challenges on head on. You're anticipating what's coming your way. And this is incredibly powerful, and if you just start with this one thing, it's a very helpful thing to do. Covey also talks about beginning with the end in mind. Envision what you want in the future so you can work and plan towards it. Seems really like straightforward stuff, but this is the beginning of developing vision. What does it look like when we're done? How do you align people around that so they can get to that place? And then he also talks about putting first things first. And he sets up these quadrants of urgent versus not urgent, important versus not important. And everybody knows that you have to do the urgent and important stuff. That's sort of the no-brainer stuff. But people frequently find themselves prioritizing the urgent and not important stuff after that. That's what builds up that distraction layer. If you can't parse out the difference between what's important and what's not important, then you can't choose to prioritize. And that second quadrant on the right, not urgent but important, that's the proactive space. Those are the investments you have to carve out time for. You have to choose to make these investments. And these are really, really important investments. It's about preparation and prevention. It's about long-term planning, creating the space for innovation and creativity, clarifying your values and who you are, building relationships so you'll have partners later when you need to lean on people and you have to go build something together. It's about empowering your team so they feel autonomous and ready to take on challenges. And it's about finding work-life balance for yourself and hopefully for your team as well, so you're refreshed and you're able to tackle those challenges. So I can't encourage you enough to focus on that second quadrant. Very, very important. So this is all well and good, but it doesn't really answer the question. I'm still puzzled myself at this point. I say, okay, I'm being proactive, I'm looking ahead, I'm starting to make progress, I don't feel like I'm getting crushed like a tin can anymore, but I still don't really understand strategy. So, started looking around. Let's look at definitions. Let's try to get our brain around this, just by looking at what's out there, sort of readily available. So the Wikipedia definition, a high-level plan to achieve one or more goals under conditions of uncertainty. And this is useful. It tells you that it's not a specific tactical plan. It's not like taking a route on a map. It gives you that room for adaptation. It's high level. And you can accomplish multiple things along the way. So that's sort of a good start, but it's still very abstract. This is the famous quote from Sun Tzu, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. What this tells me is that strategy cannot be successful. It must be supported by tactics. You have to ground it in the actual work that needs to be done. And that tactics are useless if they're not informed by strategy. Last quote here. The essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And this is incredibly powerful because this is about focus. This is about choices that you make. You don't take on the world. You don't try to do everything. You make specific choices about where to invest your energy. And so in summary, still very abstract, but we've got some pieces here. We've got sort of the gestalt of what strategies are. They're proactive and goal-oriented. They're high level. They're adaptive, but they're focused at the same time. They're realized through tactics, and I would add, informed by vision, Because if you're not actually trying to accomplish some end result, why are you doing all of this in the first place? So I think to really internalize all of this, and this was true for me, the first time that I actually truly internalized strategy was when this gentleman came to Netflix to teach a class on strategy. This is a gentleman named Hamilton Helmer. He's an author, he's an investor, has been incredibly successful, and he has a method, a framework for how he thinks about business strategy. And business strategy is absolutely critical for everybody in this room who wants to be a leader or is a leader, because everything that we do should be grounded in what's important to the business and should be aligned around the strategies at the business level. So I'm going to spend some time on this. This is going to be slightly academic, but bear with me. And there will be a quiz after this, so please pay attention. This is a bit of a flyby, but I think you'll get a good flavor here. So Hamilton's definition of strategy is very specific. It's a route to continuing power in significant markets. So it's that sense of a pathway of getting somewhere. I'll talk about power, what power means in just a second. But significant markets means that it's actually worth putting in the effort to take that market on. There's a lot of money to be had. There's a lot of impact to be had in that space. You don't bother doing this if the market's not very big. And power is, this is the academic definition, I'll elaborate, the set of conditions creating the potential for persistent differential returns. And this means that essentially you can make more money than your competitors over a period of time. It gives you an advantage over them. So he wrote this book, luckily. I had taken a bunch of notes 7 years ago, but I was sort of scrounging around trying to find them, and I got lucky because Hamilton actually published his book, which captures all the stuff that I learned. So I do encourage you all to take a look at this. And he describes 7 powers, and he walks through each one of these. I'm going to cover this, and we'll do this sort of one by one, but at a high level, scale economies, network economies, counter positioning, switching costs, branding, and cornered resource. I'll explain briefly what each one of these are. But I also want to point out, I missed process power, and it's one of my favorites. I also want to point out that there's no mistake here that Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, wrote the foreword for this book because these strategies have been applied at Netflix. These are the models that have been applied when formulating and making plans at a fairly high level. So Hamilton talks about power giving you 2 things. It gives you a benefit and a barrier. And the benefit essentially is you can make more money than your competitors. Usually it's because you have lower costs. You might be able to charge more for your product. There's a variety of reasons why you might have that benefit. The barrier is just important. How do you keep your competition from taking that benefit away from you? That's essentially all that this says. And you need to have both of these to have real power in a market. For example, scale economies. This is a business in which per unit cost declines as production volume increases. This is classic scale. This is the more I buy, I can buy in bulk, I can get a lower cost on a per unit basis, I can make more money. Amazon's a great example of that because they're doing this on an absolutely massive scale. I think they're well over a $300 billion company now, and almost everything they do is about scale. The benefit is that they can get lower costs. The barrier is that they have so much efficiency in what they do that if a competitor comes along, they can smack them down quickly by just dropping their prices, teach them their lesson, bump your prices back up. You do that a few times, nobody's going to take you on. And that's essentially where Amazon is today. Nobody's trying to build the next Amazon, certainly not as a direct competitor. Network economies, the value of a product to a customer is increased by the use of the product by others. People go to LinkedIn to connect with other people and potentially to find work. Recruiters go there to go find the people to hire. And the more of them that are come on each side, the more benefit there is to all the participants in the system. And this creates a lock in that system. This is why there are many companies out there trying to rip people away from LinkedIn. I just kind of delete all those requests from all those other little companies because LinkedIn is kind of where I am. It's the most efficient place for me personally. Counter-positioning is an interesting one. A newcomer adopts a new superior business model which the incumbent does not mimic due to anticipated damage to their existing business. Vanguard did this to Fidelity. They did these no-load index funds. There's no managers picking stocks, not charging you those extra fees to pay for their time and the investments they're making. And Vanguard came in and took a big chunk of the market away from those mutual fund investment companies. Switching costs, the value loss expected by a customer that would be incurred from switching to an alternate supplier for additional purchases. Apple made a really smart choice with iTunes. They put things in their own proprietary format. If you go to some other company to try and get your music, you're leaving that behind. There's a huge cost to a user to go to another company, and that creates sort of a lock-in effect. Branding, I looked it up just this morning because I wasn't sure. Tiffany's been around for 180 years. I didn't know that. Branding is about the durable attribution of higher value to an objectively identical offering that arises from historical information about the seller. Tiffany can charge 2 or 3 times what a competitor might charge for the exact same materials, the same workmanship, all of that. And that gives them substantial power in the market, and you can't take it away from them. Do you have 180 years to spend to build up that kind of brand? Probably not. Brand can be built up more quickly than that, but this is sort of the quintessential example here. Cornered resource, preferential access at attractive terms to a coveted asset that can independently enhance value. The easy no-brainer on this is something like a patent, where you simply have exclusive rights to that thing for a guaranteed period of time. But Hamilton uses the story of Pixar, where Edward Catmull, John Lasseter, and Steve Jobs came together to build this amazing company that was going to transform animated film. And they came together explicitly because they wanted to work together. And they weren't going to go work at DreamWorks or someplace else. So this was a cornered resource for Pixar. And finally, process power. Embedded company organization activity sets which enable lower costs and or superior product, which can be matched only by extended commitment. And you think about Toyota and the incredible investments they made into automated assembly lines. They had disciplines around saying that anyone in the assembly line could pull a cord and stop the entire thing if they saw anything wrong. And they'd go fix the root cause, make it work better, and move forward. And that allowed them to create cars much less expensively with higher quality. So really powerful stuff there as well. So that's the little academic section. Thank you for bearing with me. And now we're going to get into kind of the fun part here. I wanted to lay that foundation for you because I'm going to ask you about what you think these powers are and what's been applied. So the vision for Netflix, again, home rental library, subscription. Nice, simple vision here. But given what I've sort of gone through, this is kind of unfair because this is pretty deep stuff, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What form of power did Netflix have over Blockbuster? Does anybody want to take a guess? Say it again? Counter positioning. What else? Switching costs. That's interesting. Network economy, maybe. I'm not sure. There are 2 that I am pretty sure of, and I would argue that Netflix had 2 forms of power against Blockbuster. I call this the 1-2 punch for Blockbuster. This is why they went down so hard. Correct on counter positioning, whoever had that. Netflix had a business model that was radically different from Blockbuster's, and they couldn't even conceive of embracing this model. So much so that in 2000, I'm going to go right past this as we just talked about this, Blockbuster actually laughed Netflix out of the room in 2000 when Barry McCarthy went there to say, hey, you know what? You guys are doing the in-store stuff. We're doing DVD by mail. Why don't we combine forces? And they wanted none of it. They just couldn't even conceive of taking on this kind of model. And for years, and I remember this, for years they said, Netflix is a niche business, it's never going to go anywhere, and they just doubled down and stayed with their model. Until 2004, when they suddenly realized that we were starting to eat their lunch and engage. But in 2004, Netflix had a 5-year runway ahead of Blockbuster to do something else, to develop another form of power. And that was process power. And this is hidden, which is why you might not have known this intuitively, because this is not something that everybody knows in terms of investment. And reminder, process power, the embedded company organization activity sets which enable lower costs and or superior product, which can be matched only by an extended commitment. Well, that extended commitment was happening over 5 years while Netflix and calling it a niche business. And back then, if you went to one of the Netflix shipping centers, you might see what you would expect initially. You know, there's trucks and you walk in and there's the manual steps for doing rental return. You can imagine an army of people dealing with DVDs. And there was some of that. Some of the process was manual and did have humans doing it, like opening and inspecting for cracks, cleaning the DVDs and polishing them, although this was actually automated later. But here's where the fun starts. Netflix modified or had the company that created postal sorters for the USPS and had them modified to automate their business. This is an example of that. And this machine was used to do rental returns, so essentially scan the DVDs on the way in, register in a software system, check to see if that same DVD needed to go out the same day. Don't go put it away into storage if you know you're going to ship it the same day. As the envelopes were flying past, it had an inkjet printer that could spray on people's addresses and barcodes. It could do pre-sort and put the DVDs into bins by zip code so they could just be picked up by the USPS and delivered directly to that correct post office. And this lowered Netflix's costs substantially. Here's a close-up of a barcode scanner, the printer, and the sorter section. Here's a fun device. This is the envelope stuffer. This thing could stuff 4,200 envelopes an hour. There would be several of these in one of our hubs. A little bit of close-up here on the conveyor. Stuff, fold, seal, and these little suction cup things that would put the stickers on to seal it. And of course, that was just in the hub itself. Those software systems were then deeply integrated with all the software systems for the rest of the business. So you can see your movies shipping out of your queue and going into your section of what's out. We did address validation to do barcoding. The logistics systems that were tracking all the inventory in flight were deeply plugged in, so we knew whether we needed to even ship some over to another hub because that was closer to the customers that had demand. So really deep, deep integration and incredibly efficient. And so when Blockbuster started really thrashing, they had entered the market, they were competing with Netflix, and they started lowering their prices to try to take market share away from Netflix. There were two things that we could have done. We could have followed them down and chosen to lower prices along with them out of fear, or hold the line. And because we knew how efficient we were, because we knew that they were charging less money and their costs must have been astronomically high, because they didn't have all those years to do that automation, we just waited. And that was the knockout punch. They eventually just collapsed under their own weight. They could not afford to continue with the model that they had. And so now in 2011, there were stories at the very end of how Netflix just destroyed Blockbuster. I love that. Sounds great. I'm very proud of that. That was a phase when I was very happy when that happened. It was stressful times, though, I do have to tell you. So now let's move on and let's look at Netflix streaming. And let's talk about counter-positioning, because this is really interesting. So Netflix hadn't even fully won the battle with Blockbuster before they started going, so if we're the incumbent, who's going to take our market away from us? And we knew that bits weren't always going to be delivered to people's homes to watch movies on a physical disc. There was this internet thing we were actually using for other things that probably could be used. And so Netflix did something that very few businesses are willing to do. They counter-positioned against themselves. They chose to cannibalize their DVD market, knowing that their future was going to be in digital delivery over the internet, not on DVD. And so the business model shifted just ever so subtly from DVDs by mail with the home mental library to streaming on demand with a subscription. So again, all the muscles we built around subscription, all that got to continue. All we did was change the delivery mechanism. And Netflix had some visions for where they wanted to be. We wanted to become a much-loved global internet TV service, create a highly valuable, durable business, which is why Netflix focuses on the long term, not short term, in terms of its business metrics. And lead a creative revolution. This is the fun part, enabling artists, enabling directors and writers to find their niche, to create content unencumbered by studios trying to micromanage them, and create amazing content. So here's an interesting question. You all know Netflix is successful today. That's not going to be a big story for all of you, but what power now do you think Netflix has in the market that gives it defenses, gives it a benefit and a barrier in the current world? Branding, interesting. Cornered resource, interesting. Okay, I hate to tell you this, but you're all wrong. Sorry. The clue is right here in the description that I gave early on. Look at the words here. Global leader in subscription internet TV, growing slate of global original content, 109 million to 115 million. You see the drift here. Scale economies. That's what Netflix has in its favor. I can get into a debate about the other powers. It's interesting to talk about that, but this is really what it's all about for Netflix, and I'll walk you through so you can see why. Again, business in which per unit cost declines as production volume increases. But in the beginning, Netflix didn't have power in the market. You have to get started somewhere. So we started licensing content early on for streaming, doing what are called non-exclusive licenses. And what this means is Netflix could go to Marvel and say, we want your whole catalog, we want to have it available on streaming, we're willing to pay you a certain amount of money for that. But your competitors, your direct competitors, subscription, video, on-demand competitors to Netflix, could also get that same content. There was nothing to keep them from acquiring it. Let's walk through. I'll walk you through the math on this. It's really very straightforward. Imagine Netflix has 50 million members who are willing to watch one piece of the content from that catalog. And Netflix says, okay, Marvel, let's use that example, we'll pay you $50 million for a non-exclusive deal to get access to that content. And that works out okay. This isn't actually real math. If Netflix was paying $1 per view, they go out of business, but this is great from a model perspective. So, $1 per view. Amazon comes along to the same studio and says, well, we only have 5 million members. We're still new. We're trying to break into this market. So we'll pay you $5 million because we want to get parity on a per view basis from Netflix. This is what we can afford. And hey, you're going to get an extra $5 million, so why not take it? And so the studios did. This is how things played out in those first few years. But the strategy came in once Netflix started to hit scale. And this is a model where we used exclusive studio contracts to create competitive barriers. Competitors cannot license the same content at the same time, but you have to pay more for that. And so let's walk through that same exercise again, but now with the exclusive model. Netflix has its 50 million members, which are going to watch one title. But this time we're willing to pay $60 million to get an exclusive contract. And it does cost a little bit more. It goes from $1 to $1.20 per view. Proportionally, that doesn't seem too bad. It's only a 20% increase. But here's what happens when Amazon tries to take that deal away. They still only have 5 million members, but to take that deal from Netflix, they have to pay $60 million to take that deal away because now it's exclusive. They can't get that same content unless they pay what Netflix was willing to pay. And at that point, that's a bankrupting business plan. $12 per view just doesn't scale. And this is why you see the market today sort of becoming these exclusive independent channels, because this is the strategy that all the players are now taking, trying to create their own original content. And when you look at the original strategy, all that originals are is a more efficient global version of exclusive studio contracts. But Netflix gets to move all the way upstream to the very beginning, to the inception of the project, talking to people who are writing the scripts, sometimes even before the scripts are written. So you take on all the risk, but you take on all the benefit. And by the way, when you're trying to license content from studios, they like to license it region by region by region. You got lawyers and people negotiating over every single one of them. It's incredibly inefficient for the business to do that. But if you get if you own the content from day one, then you also own exclusive global rights on day one. This is why Netflix is able to release globally all at the same time and get the scale benefit of being able to make that content available to every user in the world that is a Netflix member, not locked into specific regions. So incredibly powerful. This year, Netflix is spending about $6 billion on content. A lot of that, almost all of it is exclusive. I don't know if they're doing any non-exclusive deals at this point. And they're trying to get to a model fairly soon in the next few years where half of that's going to be original content, half of it will be licensed. So that's huge. Next year, they're going to spend $8 billion on content. That's how much they're doubling down on this strategy. So this then begs the question, okay, that's great, but how do you get to scale so that you get that advantage? And this is kind of the more important pathway, the route to getting to that power. And I'll say there are really two dimensions to this. One is the concept of ubiquity. And we saw it before, every possible device in the world. Yeah, we launched on Windows Media Player in 2007. It took a little while to get some steam going, and then we started going platform by platform by platform. In 2010, when I was managing streaming infrastructure, we had 1 year where we launched on all the Apple devices, gaming consoles, phones, and then in 2011 rounded things out with Android. We also were systematically expanding geographically, so let's get access to more and more customers by going to more countries. And you can see, again, this relentless path towards growth, expanding geographically. And then, of course, languages. If you're going to go to these different countries, not everybody speaks English. So we should make sure that we localize that so that people can really enjoy the content and deepen the penetration there. And then in 2016, we just said, this is getting really, really tedious, going country by country. Let's just get this over with and go global. And that's exactly what we did. We launched on that day in 190 countries, except for China. Everybody knows China's a little more challenging in terms of market and trying to break in for regulatory reasons. And there's a few other small places in the world. We further deepened our penetration by doing something that I didn't even expect, getting onto cable boxes. The cable operators early on thought Netflix was a threat, it was causing cord cutting, there was all this fear. They saw us as really a pretty dangerous force. But Netflix discovered that with the right approach, we were able to actually work with those cable operators and get right on the device that people have in their home. And for some demographics, and typically an older generation, that might be the only device they use to watch content. So this gives us access to an even deeper reach into various places and into different regions. And of course, we added more languages, Chinese, Korean, and Arabic. But here's the interesting part. I assume all of you are sort of more in the engineering world. We also aligned our infrastructure goals to mirror the strategy of the company at the business level. And I created what I would call ubiquitous infrastructure. We used AWS to launch rather than building our own data centers. And the goal was to reliably and efficiently serve any customer from any region. And so we built out an eventually consistent, ubiquitous data plane. Our Cassandra rings were expanded out to replicate data in all regions, roughly sub-second to a few seconds of delay between replication. We built out a similar infrastructure ourselves because we didn't have this for ourselves. We have a memcached distributed solution called EVCache. We built out this complex mechanism using Kafka to be able to do replication from multi-region replication from 3 different regions. And our traffic management was also dealt with this concept of ubiquity, where if any region failed, because the data was always sitting in all 3 regions, all we had to do was use DNS and our proxy back channel to move traffic over to the other regions that were surviving. And this gave us an incredibly resilient global platform. So the other answer to the question of how we achieve scale, I'm going to go all the way back to that Michael Porter quote, strategic focus, what you do and what you don't do. And I really want to underscore this point because this is incredibly powerful and has also helped Netflix be very successful. Netflix originally, when we were going to do streaming, was going to build an actual device, the Netflix player. We had acquired Roku and brought them in-house, and we're building this thing. And then before we launched the service, we went, uh-oh, if we do this, we're going to be competing with the very companies that we want to partner with. And so that device got spun out, and we decided we were a service company. We were not going to be a hardware manufacturer. Likewise, Netflix doesn't do pay-per-view, electronic sell-through, or ad-supported. And so again, we were not competing with the companies we wanted to partner with. Microsoft, we got on the Xbox. They did their own sell-through model. If we had been competing with them, they would have said, maybe not, especially not early on. In fact, this was so powerful that Apple chose to have Netflix on the iPad on the day of launch because they felt that we were, A, not competing with iTunes at all, and we were a must-have for the device. We also don't do sports and news. These are real-time, require completely different technical investments. And so again, we were focused. Now, another part of focus is shedding your legacy. How many people remember Quickster? Yeah, I wish I could forget, don't you? So Reed Hastings woke up one morning and realized that the DVD business domestically was slowing us down in terms of global growth. Very different business models, and every time we were trying to make changes for the global product, we had to go, oh, but what about DVD? What do we do there? And so the decision was made to spin off this separate company, increase prices, because now we needed a streaming plan that could stand on its own, and we were only charging like an extra $2 if you were on a DVD plan. And so we did an equivalent of a 60% price hike for people that had what we call the hybrid plans. There was no plan to integrate. We wanted to sever this down the line, and it was going to be a whole new brand. Well, customers were not that thrilled with this. And you have to remember, this was during the financial crisis. Occupy Wall Street was happening. We sort of misread the times, and Netflix became the poster child for corporate greed for a very short time. Wasn't our intention, wasn't really what we were intending to do. We thought we were just making our business more efficient, but it was not well received. So here's a question for you. Was this a bad strategy? Somebody want to raise their hand? Yes or no? How many people think this was a bad strategy? Let's see. Oh, you guys know what I'm going to say, obviously. It was a good decision from a strategic perspective. It was flawed execution, I would argue, because DVD really was a boat anchor for Netflix global streaming. It did slow us down, and it was very, very important that we figure out how to free ourselves, and we did even after the Quickster thing when we backed away from that. Behind the scenes, we started peeling away and separating out those systems, really doing what we probably should have done in the first place, which is have a lightweight integration between the two services, but not disrupt the customer experience too much. And so really, this is what happens when you have unencumbered expansion. That 2,000% increase came after that. Not exclusively because we decided to abandon the deep integration with DVD, but it was definitely one of the elements that put wind in our sails and allowed us to grow more quickly. Looking ahead, these are the current projections for Netflix, and every year they go up. Now, some analysts are predicting we'll get to 160 million in the next few years. So now I'd like to close this out. I'd like to talk to you about my current job and how it feels very similar to that moment in time when I was talking with Neil Hunt, sitting across from him at a picnic bench. This is a slightly more modern story. Instead, I was on a video conference call with this gentleman, Jason Warner. Came from Heroku and Canonical, ran engineering there. And he and I were having this conversation, and he starts to paint a vision for me that seemed kind of interesting. He said, you know, GitHub's at a point now where people think of the business as it's about source code management and pull requests and sort of lightweight project management, but there's a much bigger vision here. There's an inflection point that's happening right now. Imagine a platform-enabled developer ecosystem where all of the best technologies can come together within this one single ecosystem, where this can become the destination for software engineers, all the tools that they want in one place. They can come here every day and have an amazing experience and get their job done. And that sounded pretty amazing to me. And I started thinking about Hamilton's work when I was having this conversation. I was thinking about network economies. So if all of the integrators are there, all the people providing best-of-breed products are bringing their products into this ecosystem, and almost every developer in the world at least has a GitHub account. Maybe they don't use it all the time, but we can drum that up. We can end up having a world where engineers come there because the tools are there, and the tools are there because the engineers are there. That's the essence of a network effect. But I think there's actually another form of power here, which is cornered resource. GitHub also sits on the largest base of source code in the world. And imagine what happens if you let machine learning loose on that data, the kind of things you can learn, the kinds of things you can do to help your customers be better, understanding what are the best practices around security, what technologies are getting traction right now, and why. So real power, I think there's the potential here for some substantial power in the market. And to be honest, that's why I joined, because I saw this, because I understood the strategy, and I see the potential. I also get to do fun stuff. I get to take all the stuff that I learned at Netflix, learning about microservices and distributed systems and cloud, stuff that we learned incrementally over the years and figured out as we were going, and take all of those best practices, all of that perspective, and do it again, building out a first-class modern architecture, one that's reliable, scalable, and secure, fast, layered, so you create correct abstraction layers that keep your architecture clean, distributed, of course, because that's how you achieve scale and reliability. Portable, built on top of something like Kubernetes that could run in multiple environments, or it could run in a data center or a cloud just as easily. Multi-region, of course, again for reliability, but also for latency purposes, and multi-cloud. My team is building out this red layer here of platform services, which you can think of as AWS abstractions for the GitHub ecosystem. So putting things like storage and database and Git behind these abstraction layers and enabling integrators to go and create new products on top of that platform with access to our information, our metadata and data. So I'm really looking forward to this. This is just the beginning. We'll see how it all goes, but I'm really excited about building a GitHub universe. And if you're interested in hearing more about that, certainly come track me down at the conference. I want to give you a few takeaways as we go here. First of all, start out being proactive. Start to get ahead of your demand. Put first things first and focus on those things that are not urgent but important. And be visionary. If you're a leader, paint a picture for your team about what it looks like when you get to the place you want to get to. The clearer you can make that picture, the more likely it is you're going to accomplish it. If you can see it, you can get there. Study strategy. I am still a novice at this. I might sound like I know what I'm talking about here. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface myself. But study strategy because it really matters, especially if you understand the strategy for your business. And use all of this to drive alignment. And ultimately, it all only matters if you make an impact, if you actually get something done. All of this is not just for the sake of doing it. It's for the sake of accomplishing something that matters and making your dent in the universe. So I think I have about a few minutes left. I can take a few questions, and I'll be around a little bit afterwards to take more questions one-on-one. Any questions? Yes.
So in 2001, 2011.
Hold on.
Decision was made.
Mike guy's coming. There you go.
Oh, thanks, Jared.
In 2011, the decision was made to basically separate this DVD business out of Netflix. And you got a drop in stock price, and you got this negative public, I don't know, perception. How was this vision communicated back to the engineering, the individual contributors, and were they supportive of that?
The way it was communicated to engineering was that we needed to do this split, and so we needed to start figuring out how to sever all the ties. There were common billing systems, there were common subscriptions, we needed to be able to tease all that apart. But essentially somebody was put in charge of starting to put a plan together and work directly on that. It was actually a very well-coordinated project. We're good at the execution on that side. The poor execution that I was talking about was just the decision to do the Quickster thing, the different brand, all of that. But under the hood, in terms of the mechanics of it, it was a classic, put a leader in charge, get people together, figure out what the pieces are, figure out your dependencies, and just start executing on that. So it was actually relatively straightforward from that perspective. And that's actually what we did under the covers afterwards, once we pulled back from the Quickster brand. You'll notice there is actually a separate DVD.com brand today for DVD, and it is very much a separate business. But we didn't make customers pay for the complexity of having a totally separate service. They can still bounce back and forth between the two services. Other questions? Yes.
In the abstract, you mentioned as well that you were not promoted several times while colleagues were. What were your personal lessons that changed that?
The proactive piece helped a lot. So starting to get ahead of those kinds of things. The other thing that happened was, and it was quite interesting, I was put in a situation where I was forced to think at a higher level of abstraction because I was moved from e-commerce where I had been an engineer and I knew everything about the space. I could go to a meeting, I didn't need my engineers to come with me at all. And then I moved into streaming and I knew almost nothing. And suddenly I had to become very much dependent on my team, and it forced me to think differently about how I led people. It forced me to lean on my team more, get better at setting context, talk about strategy and vision, where are we going, what's important. I could no longer be the person who could be both the engineer and the leader at the same time. And I do recommend for leaders that you move around in your career as a result, because the more different kinds of roles that you have and the more you're tested, the more you're going to be forced to develop these more general skills so that you can figure out how to lead almost anything. But early on, you'll start out being very, very good at one thing. So I think that was probably one thing that helped me a lot in terms of getting me to think differently about leadership. And then, of course, taking this class with Hamilton just blew my mind. I think most people at Netflix who took this class felt like it was a real game changer in terms of how they think about leadership. Yes, in the back.
One over here from us.
Sorry.
So you mentioned how originally you were considered not being strategic, and then you took the class, and then you that epiphany started happening there. At what point in time in your career did you feel that you were recognized as being strategic, and things started turning around for you?
I think it happened gradually, and I think during the course of even managing streaming infrastructure, as I said, it created this forcing function for me where I started functioning at that higher level. But I think during that time also, I chose to explicitly make some investments in operational excellence. So completely outside of my domain, I set up a cross-functional team for us to talk about overall, how do we improve the quality of the member streaming experience? And we ended up having some great discussions there. And what came out of that were some great investments. One of on the device side, the device team started deeply investing in instrumenting what was happening, really deeply understanding the error rates and what was happening, categorizing things, and then systematically working through and making improvements there. So I really felt like I made an impact there because it came out of a forum where I developed partnerships, where I had leaders sort of playing at the same level. And at the end of the day, people were inspired to go and do good work that we would not have done otherwise. So I look at that as sort of the beginning. We are now out of time. I will be around for a little while. I can hang out for 20, 30 minutes. If people have follow-up questions, I'm happy to talk about those one-on-one. And thank you very much.